Hello guys, we will be looking at the all Kenyan matchup between Sarthak Patnaik and Zadock Nyakundi. Sarthak Patnaik of Nairobi Chess Club and Zadock of Lighthouse. So this game was played in round 7 in Muscat, Oman. It's the FIDE World Amateurs Championship under 1700, and they were both on 4 points leading up to this match, and their meeting was a a coincidence, but you know, good. It's a good level sort of barometer because it shows it's a meeting between one player who is greatly overperforming. I mean, Patnaik is just uh, punching above his weight, if I may say so, and Zadok not so much. So it's a good matchup. This game, it's also a good matchup for Patnaik to see where his training has gotten him to. Because the time I met him, he wasn't, because I played him in the league earlier in the year, and he wasn't really this good, if I may say so. But okay, without wasting any more time, let's just dive into the game and see what happened. So Zadok opened with d4, or Patnaik, pardon, opened with d4. Zadok replied with d5. We have c4, c6, pawn to e3, knight to f6, knight to c3, and pawn to e6. Now we have believe it's the semi-Slav variation, and Patnaik plays knight to f3, Zadok knight to bd7, bishop to b3, and now we go into the Meran variation of the semi-Slav. So bishop back to e2. When I played him, he played bishop back to e3, and we went into this super theoretical line with a6, bishop to b7, preparing c5. He played e4. I mean, the game was just theoretical, and I got the upper hand because I knew the lines more than he did. So after b5, this time he goes bishop to e2, showing that he's better prepared this time. He has like a bunch of lines in his head. Pawn to a6, pawn to e4, and bishop to b4. The first, I believe it's still theory, but I don't think it's something that Patnaik really expected. I mean, in these positions, you most of the time expect black to play something like c5, and you play e4. They play something like knight to b4, you play knight to e5. They play knight to d5, you play knight to e4. Game continues. I mean, it's uh, all is theory still. But bishop to b4, I think it was a surprise for Patnaik, but I'm not too sure. So pawn to e5, knight to d5, continuing with the usual plans that black tries to follow. So queen to d3, pawn to c5 now, and castles. Okay, a better move here is to play something like bishop to g4. And after queen to c7, you may now castle. And if you play something like pawn to c4, you can go back to c2. And the game continues, but in this case, you have your bishop developed. You won't have a problem developing it, as you will see in the game later on. And but you always have something like b3. Later on in the game, you can bring one of your rooks to c1. Bishop to g4 is just a free development move because then it comes with tempo on the queen, and you get a bunch of development out of just that one move. So instead, he chooses to play queen to c2, bishop b7, and I think after queen to d3, pawn to c5, castles, pawn to c4, queen to c2, bishop b7, and now a3. Asking the bishop what it wants to do in that file. Does it want to be traded off for the knight? Does it want to go back? And Zadock chooses the latter, goes back to bishop to e7, knight back to d2, which I think was the first step in the wrong direction for Patnaik. Because if you really want to play knight to d2, you can play something like rook f to d1, and now let's say castles. You can now play your knight b2, in a way that if queen to b6 comes trying to attack the pawn, you always have this knight to e4, and your rook is defending the pawn on d4. So he instead went knight to d2 immediately. Zadock went queen to b6, and now he had to play back knight to f3. So you're giving black some free moves, and they're not easy free moves. They're like very, very nice development moves that black is getting out of this opening. And we always have this thing. Okay, I have the thing, and we were talking about it with Brian Irungu a while back. If you have to move your piece back to where it was before, know that you're already in the wrong direction. You're clearly losing the fight. So you really want your pieces. Once they move, they actually move with a purpose, and you don't really have to replay your moves, because then you're giving a lot of counterplay to your opponent, and your opponent has you know control of the game. So after knight back to f3, Zadok just played it 6, now denying the bishop on c1 every development, every proper development square that he has. I mean, you can try and play bishop to e3, but then eventually we can take it and have the bishop pair as black. And pawn to h6 is a very, very nice prophylactic move, because then as black we're also planning to castle, and we want some defense of the king side as we castle with these pawns lining up so properly. Plus, if the bishop was on g4 initially, and after pawn to h6, you can always reroute it back to g3 and have control of this other diagonal, instead of having it sitting on c1 just aimlessly, having nothing to move, having nothing to do rather. So pawn to h2 was played, castled, and now knight takes on e5. I think this, you can still play knight to e4 here. I think it's still playable. You might be afraid of something like rook to c8, but then bishop to d2. Just develop, just give your bishop some purpose in the game. Plus, your knight is excellently placed on e4. I mean, your queen defends it. I don't see any way that it gets chased out of there really quickly. If they play something like f5, you can always just capture and passant. Pardon, we just capture and passant, and we have this very weak e6 pawn that we may exploit later, which moves like rook to e1, bishop f1, rook to e2, and bring the other rook and just pile up, put a lot of pressure on e6. So this was a line that he should have gone for. But then in such a position as white, you're really feeling the pressure because you don't have a lot of space. I mean, so as black, as white, you're really feeling the pressure, because black has immense control of the center. I mean, the pawn on c4 is like a knife in someone's throat. You can't really develop your light square bishop comfortably. Your light square bishop is sitting awkwardly on e2. You might argue this and play something like rook to d1, bring your bishop to f1, and say that it's a defensive piece instead. But you're really feeling the pressure. You don't have a bunch of moves to play. You're looking for some way of untangling in this position, and playing knight to e4, in my opinion, is a better way of untangling in this position. I mean, it doesn't trade any pieces, but then you get some active squares for your pieces instead of just trading them off. So Patnaik, I think he traded on d5 because he felt the pressure, and he wanted to let go and eliminate some of the attackers that black has, but it was just a huge step in the wrong direction. So uh, bishop takes back, bishop to d3, just lining it up with the queen, but then you can never move the pawn on d4. So I don't really understand what that does. Maybe it prepares a move like knight to d2, knight back to d2, but playing that move just shows that Patnaik still has a rigid sense of strategy in chess. I mean, you're trying to be really fluid. You're trying to be a player who can adapt to the situation, because if your plan doesn't work, you must be able to look for a different plan and immediately start it and have like great counterplay with it. But if you're still stuck on the same plan, even after you clearly see that it's not working, then you know that you really have to brush up on your strategies and your middle game plans, because it's a really high indication that you're not as fluid as you should be. So bishop back to d2, rook to c8, and now knight back to d2 for the umpteenth time. Queen to b7, just putting immense pressure on that diagonal. And now bishop to f3 and knight to b6. So with bishop to f3, I think what Patnaik was looking for is to trade as many pieces as possible. Yes, that is practical and it's a good idea. But then when you're trading as many pieces as he is right now, you must be looking for successful pawn breaks in the endgame. You should be looking for ideas that are going to give you an upper hand in the endgame in some way. Because it's going to be an endgame, and with the majority that black has on the queen side and the control that he has in the center, because you have no natural instinctive pawn breaks in the center and you have none on the king side whatsoever. Your pawn is still on f2. You have to move the piece that will be on f3, because I'm guessing if bishop takes bishop and knight takes, the knight will be sitting on f3 and you have to move it once more so that you can play something like f4 f5, and it's just a bad showing from white. And it's you try and have some successful pawn breaks, maybe something like, okay, knight g4. So in my opinion, you should try and avoid as many trades as he is doing in this position and try and build something for yourself. Use your pieces to become more aggressive and more attacking, and I think that will give you a bunch more let's say you'll be more dangerous than what he was doing here, because you're giving black equalized like straight from the opening, and you're really trying to prove something for yourself here. And there is, first of all, there are no pawn breaks to be played in this position, and the more you're trading pieces, the easier the end game is for black, because black has very natural moves and bringing the other rooks into the game. I mean, putting his knight on a very active square like b6 and just prowling through the center. So knight to b6 was played, rook to e1, rook to c7, preparing to double up the rooks, and Patnaik again traded the pieces in the center. Knight takes on d5. The knight is beautifully placed on d5. It's controlling the entire center. You have no pawn breaks once again. You can try to play something like f4, f5, but then I think it's late, because black's attack with a5 before is going to be quicker than yours with f5 and f4. And with f4 and f5, I mean. So knight back to b1 was played. So many moves with the knight, and none of them is really threatening the position. So I'd rather like play something like knight to e4 once more. But to each their own. So knight to b1, rook doubled up on the c file, knight to c3, rook back to d8, something like maybe rook to d7 is better. Meaning this rook instead of the other, but no harm, no foul. So rook to d8, queen d2, bishop to f8, also king to f8, I mean, is also practical and playable in this position, because now if he tries to trade after takes and queen takes on h6, you can always play something like king to e8 and you're completely safe on e8. The pawn breaks here won't be as lethal as the attack that you're going to unleash on the queen side. So easier played. This will be easier played. So many moves here. I think just moving the knight out of the way and putting a little pressure on d4. You can even bring that rook first. Oh, yeah. I think everything here is working for black. Everything is playable. So instead, Zadock played bishop to f8, also playable. Queen to d1, knight back to e7, queen to c2, knight to f5, just placing the knight on another better square on f5. I think here in this position, you should at least try and be active. Play something like queen to g5, or queen to g4 rather, and try and be as dangerous as you possibly can, because you're allowing a lot of play to black, and you being passive and playing on the second file. I mean, none of white's pieces are ever going to leave their first and second and third rank, because I think he was pragmatic. He was playing a little bit too safe. you have to be aggressive, especially when you're playing against higher rated players. You really have to take it to them. Don't let them have an easy time. So I play something like that. Knight to f5, you can bring the other rook into the game. Just, you know, play the game as it's supposed to be played. Don't be too passive in your move. So knight to f5 was played, rook to d1, rooks are double, queen to d2, just trying to overprotect the pawn on d4, which I think was also not a very good idea, because if you see the pawn falling, just let it fall and look for some other counterplay, because there's this saying that most positions in chess just fall after the capture of a crucial pawn. So this is going to be such a case, because Zadock played bishop to c5, knight back to e2, just overprotecting the pawn, and after queen to a7, you can't protect it anymore. Queen to c3 was played, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and now queen back to c2. The queen was added into the battery, rook takes, queen takes. Now after rook to e2, Zadock played rook to d5, just adding pressure on the e5 pawn. Rook to e4 was played. Now after check, and rook to d2, it's completely lost for white. He tried holding on, but Zadok just collected all the pawns. Uh, Pawn to b4, check, king to h7, rook to c8, just going behind the passed pawn, but there are so many passed pawns. You see, this was the idea. This was a successful uh, conversion by black, because the pawns on the queen side that could have stopped these passed pawns from black are just non-existent right now. They're not on the board. They're somewhere next to the clock, having they've been captured. And now you going behind one of the passed pawns just doesn't make any sense, because I mean, you can even sacrifice this pawn and push the rest. It's just lost here for white. There's nothing you could do. Just hold on. Rook check. Rook takes on f2. Pawn to a5, just defending the pawn on b4. King to b3, and now Zadock captures another pawn. Now plays check, and pushes the pawn to c2. And here Sarthak Patnaik resigned, because you can't really stop these pawns anymore. If you capture on a5, just b3, the pawns are marching down the board. You can't do you can't really stop them. You can't really launch any counter attack on the king side. You have no pawns there whatsoever. So this was a clean conversion from Zadock. He had 4 points. His round six didn't really go to plan. I'm going to show the game much later, because I've not really found it. Uh, And yeah, I'm going to look for it, and I'm going to show you people what happened in that round, but it didn't go to plan. And this is a nice way to bounce back, and it's a really good lesson for Sarthak Patnaik. I think, the more you face strong opponents, the better you get, and he's going to come back with a bunch of experience from Oman. And yeah, I guess it's going to be a successful tournament for him at least. So yeah, this was the game. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you comment on what you need to improve on, and share the game to as many people as you can. And yeah, I hope you have an excellent rest of your week.